So the purpose of general revelation is to stimulate a person's desire to seek after the true God. And as they seek after him, God reveals more of himself to them. The problem is not what God has revealed. The problem is the lens by which people look at general revelation. According to Genesis 1:27, we're all made in the image and likeness of God, which means that we possess certain characteristics that reflect God's character. So although we are different from God, right, there are certain incommunicable attributes, meaning there are certain attributes of God he doesn't share with us, like his omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence. There are certain attributes of God that he does share with us, like logic, rationality, love, morality. And so what that means is that even though humans disagree on religious and moral issues, we all agree that there are some things that are right and wrong. The concept of right or wrong comes from the image of God. How do we know that? Because animals don't have that concept of morality. Animals have a concept of just survival and behavior. They don't have a sense that it's wrong to kill an infant. They eat their young. They don't have remorse. They don't feel bad. There is no sense of like protect the vulnerable amongst the animals. If anything, you attack the vulnerable. Why? Because they're not made in the image of God. Why do we have a sense of protecting the vulnerable? Why do we have a sense of protecting babies? Why do we have a sense that, hey, you shouldn't, exploit people who are poor, exploit people who are defenseless? That comes from the image of God. Whether you're Democrat, Republican, atheist or not, we all agree that there are some things that are right or wrong and we should uphold some standard to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Do we not? Doesn't every culture at all time have a justice system? Even the word justice comes from the image of God. I don't see courts in the animal kingdom saying guilty or unguilty, sentencing people to death. It's just survival. So that is what distinguishes us from animals. Animals are not made in the image of God, so you cannot expect them to have any sense of standard of morality, spirituality, rationality. That is not part of the animal kingdom. We are made in the image of God. This is why deep down we know there must be a God, because we complain about God all the time. So when I say the image of God, we also have to be clear. We're living in a post-Genesis 3 image of God world. So the way one theologian said is that we have the image of God in us, but we all have it shattered. We all have it cracked. Some people's more cracked than others, like a sociopath. So they might not have sense of morality, but they will have a sense of other things that reveals God's attributes, like logic. That's the attribute of God. They will get upset if you probably said 2 + 2 is 20 or something, right? They might be very smart or logical. Because sociopaths, by definition, are so logical, they take out the morality. But logic is also an attribute of God. Does that make sense? So they still cannot claim that they don't have evidences for God, because even their logic is the evidence of God. General revelation is supposed to lead people to special revelation. But what's the problem? Why doesn't it lead people to it? So let's go over each example. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 23. People should look at creation, see God's divine power, and then they should seek after God and then know God through special revelation. That should be the process. But what happens? What does the text say? Verse 19 through 20. The power of God is obvious or plain to all people. They should know God, glorify and give thanks to him because of what they observed in verse 21. But the problem is what? In verse 18, what do people do? What's the word? What's the verb there, class? Verse 18, Romans 1. Suppress. Do you see that? So instead of looking at everything and letting it lead them to the most logical conclusion, which is God, they what? They suppress what they see. Suppression of what is plain and true. Do you see Paul's argument? So the problem is not general revelation. The problem is not that it is not clear. The problem is the people who suppress that. And they don't want to come to the conclusion that general revelation leads to. So what do? Instead of submitting to God, verse 21, although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking and their foolish hearts were darkened. So what does it mean to suppress? They go into futile thinking. They just think, philosophize. They try to figure out on their own. Darkened hearts. What is hearts? Hearts refers to the inner man, the morality. Thinking refers to the logic of the man. So their logic gets messed up. Their moral compass gets messed up. And so what do they continue to do? Verse 23. They exchanged the glory of the mortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creepy things. So in other words, instead of letting general revelation lead them to God, they create idols in the place of God. So the purpose of general revelation is to stimulate a person's desire to seek after the true God. And as they seek after him, God reveals more of himself to them. The problem is not what God has revealed. The problem is the lens by which people look at general revelation. It's we're broken images of God idea. We have biases. We have certain predisposition. We have a desire to not submit to God naturally. So when we see evidences for God, we don't conclude we need to submit to God because that's not in the realm of one of the options for us. Which means any person that you talk to, you don't have to prove God to them. They already know there is a God. They just don't want to acknowledge that. That's the starting point of evangelism. I don't waste time trying to prove God to somebody who says they're atheist. Like I said, they say they're atheists, but they talk like they believe in a God. Because they tend to complain about God all the time. How can a God allow this evil thing to happen in Ukraine? Well, if there is no God, why would you blame a God that doesn't exist? You can't say it's God's fault that kids are getting murdered in India. You can't say that. Because if there is no God, what does that leave? It's our fault, humans. But then do you notice that they blame God when evil things happen because deep down in their hearts, they know there is a God. And so they're appealing to a higher authority that they're claiming that they don't believe exists. This is where Paul and Barnabas, they come upon a crippled man. They heal him. The crowd sees what Paul had done. In verse 11 of Acts chapter 14, they said, the gods have come down to us in the likeness of men. In other words, they thought, he's Zeus, he's Hermes, right? Look at the power they just did. They healed a crippled man. And so what they do is they go to their temples, they bring animal sacrifices to worship Barnabas and Paul, thinking that they are Hermes and Zeus. So general revelation in this instance, what it should have done, it should have set up an opportunity for Paul and Barnabas to point to the true God, in other words, special revelation. But the problem is that this general revelation actually led them to want to worship their idols even more. So what happened there? They saw a clear picture of God's power through the healing of the crippled man. Why didn't they want to seek after Yahweh or the true God? Why did it reinforce their belief in Zeus and Hermes or the idols? Well, it all goes down to the same concept that we've been talking about. The problem is not that general revelation is insufficient in terms of its clarity. The problem is the lens by which people look at general revelation.